Food is more than just what's on our plate. It's the places where it's grown, it's the people who grow it, and so much more. Join me, Janice Person, your host, on Grounded by the Farm every other week as we talk about the foods we love. Hey everybody, this is Janice, and I am so excited to tell you about this episode. I'm a huge fan of savory foods, and savory foods would be nowhere without the topic of this week, which is onions. We are talking to Shay Myers of Owyhee Produce in Idaho and a little bit on the Oregon side of the state line. We talk all things onions. We talk about storage. We talk about sweet onions versus savory onions, yellow, white, red, how to pick which one you want to use. Talk about planting them if you're doing a garden, all those kind of things. And we even talk about his uncle's pimped out pantry. All of that and more with the guy that goes by Shay Farm Kid on a lot of social media. I got to know him through LinkedIn, where he's been telling his story for quite a while. We're going to start with a big digression because I had to know about the name Owyhee. Hold on, and here we go. Is it Owyhee?
Owyhee, yes, almost like Hawaii. In fact, that's where the name came from. It's an 18th century spelling of Hawaii.
Really?
Hawaii. Yeah.
And so I'm assuming it's like Native American.
The French fur traders. This is weird. Now we're gonna go. Well, we started with the digression, from the very beginning. The French fur traders, when beaver pelts were all the rage, brought people from the Sandwich Islands, the Hawaiian Islands, to our area to trap the beaver in the rivers and the streams. And a group of them went into the mountains and never returned. And in homage to them, they named the mountains the Owyhee Mountains, or the Hawaii Mountains.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's like an area of Idaho, specifically a county or a region?
Yeah, it's a region. It's really kind of a tri-corner region. It's Oregon, Nevada, and Idaho, kind of where the three corners come together right here in the desert.
Perfect. And your company is right in that area. You work on different sides of the state line, but really you're outside of there. So help me understand what Owyhee Produce does, because onions is the big force that we're going to talk about, but I know you do a little bit more too.
So a lot of folks assume that farmers either do what we do, which is a vertically integrated farm, which means we grow all of our crops, or you're just a packer, someone who packs the crop. We grow a lot of different crops. 8 or 9 different crops actually are in our rotation, but there's really a core of crops that are really our money makers, if you will, the crops that we rely on. And those are primarily onions, mint, asparagus, sugar beets, and to some extent sweet potatoes. We're new into sweet potatoes, so I wouldn't call them a real big money maker yet, but they are, something that helps us bring money into the business. What we do though is not just grow those crops, we pack them and then market them, to different areas throughout the country. And our core, really what we rely on the most, well, I guess our calling card, what initially opened the door for us was asparagus. And we like to joke that the Peruvian drug trade is actually what got us into asparagus, and really connected to that. Because the US government decided in about 1998 that they were going to stop the cocaine production in Peru by teaching the Peruvians how to grow asparagus. So they would take their poppy fields out and put asparagus in. Well, what they ended up doing is subsidizing to a major level US corporations to go to Peru and put in their packing facility or their canning facilities, and all of the production in the US went away. And so we had to react. And that was my mom back I was in 98, 99, I was a senior in high school. So my mom, we like to throw people to the wolves in our family. And so she was just thrown to the wolves and had to figure out how to fresh pack and market asparagus. And so she learned how to do that. And then with onions, we kind of followed suit. We learned that lesson on how to do that and how to pack and take care of the customer and everything that entails. And then obviously the sweet potatoes kind of followed in the same direction.
So onions is not something I feel get the right attention. They don't necessarily get a lot of thought, but the minute you have a cube steak and you didn't have onions when you were cooking it, you know something's missing, right? So help me understand what kind of place being an onion farmer specifically is? Who are the people that are like, yay, onions?
I guess the yay onion people are in the northwest of the US, Idaho, Oregon. So a lot of people think of Idaho and they're like potatoes. Like they've done a phenomenal job marketing Idaho as a potato state, but it's also Idaho and Oregon, this area that it borders both states. This valley is one of the, if not the largest onion growing region in the United States and one of the largest in the world. So, I mean, I guess we have a lot of hoorah, high five moments around this area because the economy, especially the agricultural economy, lives and dies via onions. If we have a good onion year, the tractor dealership and the local hardware store and the lumber, the guys selling lumber and hardware for houses, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone knows when there's a good onion year because of the way that those dollars flow into the economy. And so I think that's pretty easy for us to get excited about it because of the regionality and how important it is for where we live.
Yeah, and I really do think that outside that area, it's frequently taken for granted. I can remember earlier this spring, suddenly people had to think about onions because when they went to the grocery store, they couldn't get potatoes and they couldn't get onions. Mm-hmm. And so they suddenly were like, wait a minute, what's going on? I know your family farm, your operation, it was pretty heavily impacted by that sudden awareness of people that onions weren't there, but you were facing a very different end of that spectrum. Tell me how that went down for you guys.
Yeah, so initially, when everything occurred and everyone was doing, I think the politically correct term was stockpiling, not hoarding. They were stockpiling all of this, food, canned food, and then hardy vegetables that they could store. We saw a huge impact. Like, everything was like, there was the initial slowdown but then there was the spike in retail. But that spike in retail only lasted for a couple of weeks. And then the impact of all the restaurant closures and the school closures and the sporting venue closures were felt extensively in our area because a huge portion of our onions, probably 70%, not of ours on our farm, but of this region, 70% of those onions are sold to food service and processors. If you think about it, when you go out to eat, if you're, and it really doesn't matter where you go, but if you go to Olive Garden, you got those red onions on your salad. If you don't like onions, it doesn't matter. Those come on your salad. You take them aside and you don't eat them. If you get a hamburger at most places, it comes with an onion, whether you want it or you don't want it. And so that utilization in the restaurants for flavor, for inexpensive flavoring, because onions are also really cheap, we felt that really quickly because that extra consumption and frankly waste in some cases was not there. Yeah. And a lot of people won't like to hear that, but the industry, like a lot of what we do is reliant on large utilization, like by restaurants and processors. And the natural course of events for that is some of that stuff is put on a plate and not utilized. Right. And so we felt that. And we felt it really, really, really pain with some pretty significant pain when it came to the last portion of our season because we were onion store for 9 months.
Okay.
So but the end of our season is roughly, we'll call it the end of April. Well, when all of this happened, if you look at the timing, we were at the end of the life expectancy or the shelf life of those onions. So had it been the beginning of our season, we could have cushioned the blow by spreading out our sales or capturing more sales later, but the timing was just awful. So there were a lot of onions that were simply put into compost pits or put back on fields as green fertilizer because there wasn't an alternative.
Yeah, that's gotta suck. I mean, just to do that, I mean, I feel bad when I'm cleaning out my refrigerator and realize I've wasted food at home. And I think for farmers, generally, you're thinking about producing it for people, bring joy to their plate, bring flavor to their plate, and to have a lot that goes unused or unsold. And some of those you probably had contracts or at least agreements on. And so I can only imagine. I remember you doing some videos. One of the things people should know about you, Shay, is you do so many videos on LinkedIn, YouTube, like you're everywhere. Do you TikTok?
I TikTok. TikTok's I'm not on Instagram very much, but I am now a little bit because I do my TikToks and I can put them on Instagram. But the main place you'll find me is LinkedIn. That was really where I started because I was really a, a B2B platform, a business to business platform, and that's really who's buying our produce. But it has slowly transitioned my content because of the thirst for information really has turned from a business to business to a business to consumer or a farmer to consumer type of content. And I try and teach people the simplest things about farming and onions and food waste and all of those things that I can, because people want to learn so much.
Yeah. So in the world of onions, what kind of onions do you guys grow?
We grow really every type of onion. I mean, we grow a regular yellow cooking onion, as it's called. We call it in the industry a Spanish onion. We do red onions. We do red sweet onions. We do white onions. We do yellow sweet onions. And we even dabble a little bit in organic production on onions, reds and yellows.
For people who don't know how to pick which onion to use for different things, how would you explain it? You used one as a cooking onion, so the yellows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's obviously a little bit of controversy behind this. I always get the critics that don't agree, and everyone's got their...
Perfect. Everybody gets to pick.
Yeah, my opinion is, and this is largely how it happens. A yellow onion, a regular brown skin, like a brown onion, is for cooking. The sugar content is actually higher than any other type of onion in a brown onion after it's cooked. It's going to caramelize the best. So if you're cooking, use a brown onion. If you're in a raw setting and you want to do something that's raw, you can use a red or a white. But if you want oniony, strong, powerful onion flavor, you use a white onion. And if you want a little bit of sweetness, you use a red onion. But I would recommend not cooking a red or a white. Both are gonna not really caramelize and taste anything like what a regular brown or yellow onion is gonna taste like. And then, and these sweet onion guys will hate me for this, but the sweet onion, if the water content, if the sugar content's there, but the water content's really high, so it's really kind of a waste to cook a sweet onion too. If you're gonna cook, pick that really brown, lots of skin looking onion, and you'll enjoy it a lot better in my opinion.
Yeah. And the sweet onions, so help me understand. There's Vidalia sweet onions, which is kind of like just the geography, right? Like it's grown in Georgia in a specific area. The varieties that you're talking about planting, are they similar to that? They just don't have the Vidalia name, or? So
the thing about a Vidalia had and still has a phenomenal onion. And I'm going into way too much detail here, but what's happened is they had a really good market and made a lot of money, and they kind of went for volume and production and went away from their flavor profile. If you want the best sweet onion in the country, frankly, it's a Walla Walla sweet, in my opinion. A Walla Walla comes out of Washington only in the summer, probably one of the best sweet onions there is. A Vidalia is second though. A Vidalia is good. It's not that it's bad, it's just not what it used to be. And then number three, so they grow a different, what used to be a flat type onion versus a globe, a grano versus a granex. Most of the varieties that we're growing in the Northwest, for the most part, are a storage type onion, and they are going to have a higher potency or pungency. They're going to be onionier. They're going to be stronger. They're going to be more likely to create some tears. Now, there's some new varieties out there, like that sweet red that we have is unbelievable. It's crazy, crazy, crazy good. But what's odd about that is we can't sell it right as it comes out of the field. It actually has to sit in storage for a few months for the pungency to go down and for the sugars to come up.
Okay.
So if you pick the right onion, which is hard to do during the Northwest season, it's hard to pick the right sweet because you might get a little bit of poison mixed in with your good stuff, and that they could be a little spicy. Our onions, if it's the wrong one, our sweets will be quite a bit spicier than what people are used to getting if they got a Walla Walla as an example, or even a Vidalia. And that's probably the best way I can answer that. So number one, just so you know if I'm ranking them the Texas 1015 is also really good. So I'd probably say Walla Walla number one, frankly, and I'll get people still mad for this, but a Texas 1015 number two, and the Vidalia number three. And then we're probably number four, unless you get just the perfect onion from our growing region, but that's going to be a lot more scarce. I think from a consistency standpoint, the order that I just put things in is a fair way to go.
So you just gave us a lot of geography at the same time. Are those the primary places where onions are grown, or just where sweet onions are grown?
So sweet onions, yeah, that's for onions in general. It's going to be California, Washington, Oregon and Idaho, the Northwest, Texas, and then Georgia. But Georgia's a really small piece of that.
Yeah. And you keep talking about the pungency or the oniony flavor. Is there like a scale for that? Like in peppers, they can tell you how hot something is.
There is, so there's the pyruvics, and the pyruvics are what they measure the pungency of an onion with. So it's a scale 0 to 10. Anything with a pyruvics rate of under 4.5 is considered a sweet. Anything from 4.5 to 5.5 is a mild, and anything above that is not sweet whatsoever, which is like when we talked about that cooking onion, that Spanish onion, those are going to come in at 7 or 8. They're going to be really hot, really. And you can think of the pyruvics as like the tear creating factor to a large extent. Like those onions are going to make you cry. But then when you cook them, you know, they're not, just because the pyruvics are high does not mean that they're going to cook up hot. So you can't correlate it that way. This is only in the raw form.
Okay.
So yeah, 0 to 10 pyruvics. If you see something, which nobody advertises what it is, but a Walla Walla is going to come in sub 3, and there's a good chance that there'll be 2 to 2.5 on the pyruvics.
Wow.
A Georgia is going to be usually between 4 and 5, and I'm sure they get some varieties in there that are in the 2.5, 3 range. And then in the Northwest, we're going to be in that 4.5, 5 range also when we're doing our sweets most of the time, with some rarities, you know, some rare varieties that'll come in the 2.5 to 3 range. And then a 1015 Texas, I don't know it well enough as far as how it tests, but I would assume that it's, you know, below 3.
Are all of those used primarily as fresh onions, or are they also processed or frozen or? Yeah,
so most sweets, I think it's fair to say, I'm not a big sweet player. I'm not in the sweet market a lot. I mean, I dabble in it, and I understand it is way better than the average listener, I guess, on the show. But aside from that, I'm not real good. The sweets are generally going to be for retail, and I would assume, I mean, across all aspects of retail, they're not often in restaurants because they're cooking with them, and they want that stable, you know, Spanish type variety of onion. The Spanish onions. Well, let me go back. Whites are going to be mostly retail. Reds are going to be probably 50-50 retail and food service.
Mm-hmm.
And yellows are going to be like a regular storage Spanish yellow is probably 60% food service and processing, and maybe more 70%, and the balance is going to be retail. That the Spanish onion, and the reason that's the case, and the volume, let's talk about that, and then I'll talk about that for a second. But
yeah,
90, probably 80, yeah, it's probably fair to say 80% of all onions are yellow that are grown, and might be 70, and then you'd be 20% red, and then only 10% white.
Okay.
So to put that in perspective, the reason there's so many more yellows that are utilized is because of food service. It's really utilitarian. Food service, restaurants, and processing. So the yellow onions, the Spanish onions, are used a lot in processing. If you buy breaded onion rings or onion rings at a restaurant that were frozen or IQF, instant quick freeze, lots of the, you know, Stovers or Campbell's soup or all of that kind of stuff where you're buying either frozen onions or canned onions or that kind of thing are going to come from a regular storage yellow onion.
Yeah, and they save the kind of value add of red onions for some of the other uses and stuff.
Right.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. So all the pasta sauces and things like that, all the fajita dinners that you get at different places usually have yellow onions, the same kinds of onions that I buy a bag of 3 pounds or whatever.
Yeah, it's about the same. It's exactly the same onion, actually, in most cases.
For your family operation, do you guys actually process onions, cut them up for different things, or is that somewhere else?
Yeah, we have a division that we started 2 years ago that we call Buck Naked Whole Peeled Onions. So Buck Naked does whole peeled. So all that does is you cut the neck off, and you cut the roots off and peel it, so that basically you have what you get at the store, or usually it's people that are doing value add, like meal prep, some type of like salsa mixes or that kind of thing. They get an onion that all they do is run through a dicer, and it's done. It's ready to use. They don't have to do any peeling. There's no waste.
Yeah.
So we do a little bit of that. I mean, we're talking not even 1% of our total volume, but that started 2 years ago. And then just the processors that we supply as part of our normal operations.
You see when you go into like Five Guys or something, they're doing the potatoes.
Yeah.
You could see them doing that with onions in order to make different things that you might want to be making. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought about it, but I probably haven't given onions enough thought as is. Are shallots onions?
Shallots are a cross between garlic and onions. I don't know all the genetics behind that, but it's garlic and onion. So it's kind of an in-between between the two. So you'll notice when you get shallots, they don't have cloves, but they have multiple hearts. There can be multiple separate kind of groupings of plants, and that's kind of the garlic side, but they also ring out. You'll notice that they're rings, like onions have rings. Whereas garlic, if you cut a clove, there's no ring there at all, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a cross between the two.
I had no idea. That's really very cool. What is the best way to store onions at home?
I get that question all the time. I need to do a TikTok on that one. First of all, the most important thing is airflow. Onions need air to stay good. So don't put them somewhere completely stagnant where there's zero air.
So a pantry with the door shut, bad idea.
It's not the worst. I mean, the worst thing you can do is put it in the high humidity drawer of your refrigerator. That's as bad as it can get, right? With your wet veg. Don't do that. Your pantry, that's not perfect. I mean, I don't know. That's where when you look at garlic, how they'll do little things where you hang it in the kitchen. Frankly, if you could do the same thing, I've heard people talk about in the past taking nylons and single looping, and hanging that up and letting the onions do that. The reason that works is because of the airflow that they get. They'll last forever if you can keep good airflow around them, and you can keep them below about 55 degrees, 60 degrees. A lot of people that we have, like my father-in-law, what he's done, you need the airflow and you need the lower temperatures. He built a pantry with an intake and an exhaust. So when it's cool at night, his pantry pulls air in from outside, right? Because it's cool in the nights here, cools everything down. And then when it gets above a certain temperature, it just shuts off. So he can essentially refrigerate his pantry using just ambient outside air. And his onions will last for a year in there.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's creative. I don't know anybody that has a pantry that cool. I
don't think I know anybody else that's got a pantry that's that cool either.
That's pretty awesome. I was impressed with heated floors in farm shops, but a pantry that kind of knows what the temperature is outside.
Pantry. Yeah.
That'd be pretty awesome. Growing onions is becoming more of a thing. More people are trying to grow things in their backyard. And I've had a few friends trying to grow onions. What would you suggest if you're trying to do something like that?
The most important thing is to get the right variety for the region that you're in. And hopefully the seed guides are doing that for you. But it's really, really critical. If you try and plant the wrong seed, so if you took an onion seed that we plant here and have a lot of success with, and you took it down and tried to plant it in Texas or somewhere in the southern half of the states, it wouldn't work. It just straight wouldn't work. You wouldn't even get an onion. And if you did the opposite, I talked about that Texas 1015 sweet. If we brought that here and planted it like we think we should plant onions, it wouldn't work here. So regionality and the correct seed variety is probably the most important thing. And the other thing about onions that's important to consider is they are really, really finicky when it comes to water. Mostly underwatering, but you can overwater them certainly too. But if you stress an onion at the wrong point in time, you'll get no yield. You'll get no size. They won't finish. You have to be pretty consistent. If you're a zucchini farmer or a zucchini gardener and you're not super successful with your zucchini or your squash, I wouldn't recommend onions. You kind of need to be, I'm not saying they're super hard to grow, but they are way harder than a lot of things that are pretty hardy. They're just not forgiving of any mess ups. As an example, if we took one of our onion fields and it's July 15th and it's hot outside, and we miss our watering by 8 or 10 hours, we'll lose 20 to 40% of our yield of the potential because we missed by 8 to 12 hours. That's all it takes. If you're not able to really monitor what you're doing, you'll struggle a lot more with an onion. Doesn't mean you won't have anything. So it's not like it's all or nothing, but it will have an impact if you can't really pay attention the way you need to.
So I think I remember on one of the podcasts you talking about your family does some drip irrigation. Is that the way you guys get water into your onion fields?
Yeah,
usually?
So we're almost 100% drip irrigated. It depends on the year on the farms that we're on. But yeah, we drip irrigate everything. And that's for that consistency. It also allows us to move across the fields a lot more quickly. and also saves a bunch of water.
And just so people understand, it's kind of like having a soaker hose under the soil profile a little bit or something. Or, you have places where the water comes out, but it's under the soil so you don't lose water, and it's delivered right into the root zone, because you don't think about it when you're watering plants. You're really trying to get the water to the roots of a plant.
And that way we don't water the weeds either. It's a nice way to do it so you're not watering the weeds everywhere else.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I think for me, the idea of looking at fields that are drip irrigated, they always look kind of wild on the ends with the tubes coming out and stuff. It's really kind of weird to look at, but it's like the perfect way to get the water right. So do you guys have soil probes to know how dry the water profile is down deep, or do you just kind of know based on temperature?
We have an idea on the temperature, and we'll just check the fields, and with the consistency of the soil, we can tell. But there are, and we have utilized soil probes that are at varying depths, because we don't want to water past the root zone of the onions. So you put a probe that's right below where the root zone of the onion should be. And as soon as that gets wet, you're like, okay, I'm as wet as I'm going to get. I can shut the water off. You also do the same thing on the surface, because you can get too wet on the surface. So you try and get that sweet spot in the middle. But we do that with shovels and digging and soil probes as much as having, some sort of sensor, watermark sensor, which we do utilize, but you can't really replace a shovel and a probe.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I remember seeing onion seed being grown for production. And to see an onion plant that's producing the seed up at the top was kind of strange. I assume you plant everything from seed though, right?
Yes, and they're all hybrid seeds. So we won't see, not being open pollinated, we seldom see, well, this year we saw a lot. It depends on the variety. We do not plant, we plant all hybrid, and we try to avoid seeders. Like if we end up with something that goes to sprout, it means that there was some environmental condition or some growing practice on our end that caused a problem with the onion so that it didn't perform like it should. But if they do produce seed or flower, it's sterile. It's not viable seed anyway.
Yeah. The ones I'm talking about are farmers who are growing the seed for that reason, like in a seed production area. And it's such a strange thing to see, because we all know what
those, you can't plant a seed to get seed. You actually have to take a bulb from the previous year that's gone through a winter or a cold cycle to get it to wake up again. So you take a bulb from, in this case, we're talking in fall of 2020. So that onion needs to go through until next spring, and then you take that same bulb and plant it, and then that will flower, and you can get the seed from it.
So it needs that period of dormancy to come back to life to get the energy up to produce the seed. Interesting. I hadn't thought about hybrid onions. Somewhere I had missed that. So what does the hybridization do? Like what does it offer?
Just
vigor?
They probably, I'm sure it's improved yields, just more consistency. It's really more about consistency than it is anything else. It's really hard farmers are always looking for consistency, at least in their seed, because there's so much other inconsistency in weather, in water, in pests, in temperature, and everything else. So when you can remove those variables that it makes sense to remove that are in your control, farmers always go in that direction. And I think the consumer or regular folks oftentimes wonder why it is that farmers tend to go in that direction, but they forget about all the things that we can't control. So if you can control, we say that we're only 20 to 30%. Like if we're looking at a field and looking at the success of that field, our decisions are only 20 to 30% of the, I'm trying to think of the way to put that in there, of the influence, if you will, of what the final result's going to be. The other 70% is Mother Nature and how she treats us and what she gives us or doesn't give us at the end of the day. So we want to control every percentage point of those variables that we can.
And how consistent is the environment there in Idaho? I heard you explaining that it's a pretty unique valley or a pretty unique area in terms of production. What's the weather like? Because people like us, we think of Idaho, you think of mountains and colder.
Yeah, so the Treasure Valley is the second most biodiverse county in the United States in the number of crops that can grow in this region. So when we look at our weather pattern, so right now, September, I mean, I'm looking out the window at all the haze that's out there right now. It's crazy, crazy smoky. But typically, we'll see temperatures this time of year in the 80s and lows in the upper 40s. And our freeze, that we really worry about usually won't come, at least a crop damaging freeze. You might have something that would kill something that's not very hardy, but for us, we really don't worry about freezing anything until Halloween. So right between Halloween and the first part of November.
Yeah.
So, and then in the springtime, we're planting by late February to mid-March. That means we're already in the 50s and 60s in March. So we really have a lot of really nice days here, and we tend to have very little overcast or cloudy or rainy days. All of our moisture, we only get 7 inches of rain a year max, and all of that rain or that moisture comes in the form of snow generally between November and late January or mid-February.
Yeah.
And when we do get snow, we're not in a place where the snow usually stays on the ground. It will snow, and 2 days later or 3 days later, it's already melted off. And so that's kind of the environment that we're in. Although the mountains are right here, but it's a pretty mild climate. Most people are pretty pleasantly surprised. Unfortunately, more and more learning about how nice it is to be here. You get all 4 seasons, but you don't deal with, more than a month or 5 or 6 weeks of real winter.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily get the worst of summer, I hope, like 100-degree days.
Well, triple digits, but less than a dozen days a year, probably. I mean, on rare occasions, we'll get higher than that, but we're usually 8 to 10 days in the triple digits. Most of July will be in the 90s. That's our hottest month, mid-July to mid-August, and we'll be, I'm shooting from the hip here, but certainly we're in the mid-90s, 92 to 98 degrees, I would guess, from mid-July to mid-August.
Still cool down at night, though?
Still cool down at night.
Yeah.
This is a really unique region in that we don't hardly get any wind at any time other than in the spring, which also has an impact on what crops we can grow and how successful and viable they are. So in some ways good, in some ways bad. Actually, there's some crops that need the wind. Onions are not one of those, depending on which irrigation method is.
I've seen onions in small fields, but we would be talking like hundreds of acres of your area would be planted to onions?
Yes, so in this valley, the Treasure Valley, there are about 28,000 acres of onions. That's a 30-mile wide by 70-mile long valley. That's a lot of onions. You could drive around. You would have a hard time if you were like having to go from onion field to onion field in your view. You could pretty much cross the whole valley saying, okay, there's an onion field. Okay, where's the next one? Okay, it's over there, right? And just hop, skip, and jump across the whole valley going from onion field to onion field.
Is there a smell to onion fields until harvest or no?
There's windows of time when there's a little bit of smell. Certainly there's right before harvest. If we're doing an early harvest, it can be very potent, very, very potent. And that means we're going in with a green topper. We're basically lawn mowing, like using a lawnmower on the top, and those are green tops. It can be super powerful. But right now, if you were to go around, there'd be hints of onion in the smell. Now, you got to realize these are people who have grown up around onions their entire life, or people like me who were in an onion shed all day long. So if you came from the city, you might say, yeah, it's really strong. What's odd is an onion that is well cured, though. Like in our onion storages, I can bring people in, after we've cured the onions we usually cure between 45 and 60 days. They can't even smell the onions in the onion storage. I mean, they can literally be surrounded by millions and millions and millions of pounds of onions in that storage building and not smell a thing. So it really depends on the condition that onion's in.
That's amazing. Because, to me, I'm thinking like wild onions. I seem to smell them when they're cut even in the yard or something, like wild onions. They have that.
No, and that's because they're still green. If they're still green, that you can smell them. But when they cured down and dried and got that really nice dry skin on them, there's almost no smell left. That's their natural defense. That's why we can store them for 8 or 9 months at a time, is because of those paper layers that get on there that will, act as a barrier for both, penetration from moisture and contaminants, and also for the escape of, the internal edible components of the onion.
Yeah. Do you guys grow like the green onions that are?
We don't. The different varieties, very labor intensive. We've talked about it before. It'd be a short window of production for us. Who knows? We never say never around here. We grew all kinds of crazy stuff, so we'll see.
And how do you harvest onions?
Most onions, especially those in the United States, are almost exclusively mechanically harvested. We'll go through, probably a good time to put a plug in there for like my YouTube channel or something. You go to Owyhee Produce, the company name Owyhee Produce. Hopefully that's spelled somewhere so people can find it. But
yeah, it'll be linked in the show notes.
Yeah. If you go look there, I have videos, or find me Shay Farm Kid on TikTok or on Instagram. You'll see stuff, because it's hard to describe. There's a lot of steps in the process. We'll undercut the onions once they've fallen over. So an onion, when it's ripe or ready for harvest, will naturally fall over. The top dies and falls over. And then we'll come in with what some people, it's called a rod weeder. It's just a spinning bar that separates the roots from the soil. And that will finish basically drying and separates those roots so they will dry. Mm-hmm. It also makes it so our harvester, when we can come in, that doesn't dig at all. A lot of people talk and say, well, you got to dig your onions. No, we don't dig our onions because they're already sitting on the surface. Onions grow on top of the ground. So we just have to pick them up off of the ground and hope that they're, and have them properly cured and dried. And then they'll go over the harvester through the sickle bar, which will cut those dry tops off. And then we'll feed them into a 10-wheeler truck, generally, sometimes semis, but generally our fields aren't quite big enough to justify semis. It's hard to maneuver those in our smaller fields. And then from there, they go to a bulk storage building or a bin storage, where they are put on somebody said this the other day, it's a great way to describe it. Basically, we have, so an onion storage for us, our bulk storages are about 7 million, between 7 and 8 million pounds per building. The floor is like a giant air hockey floor. Like, you got an air hockey table, it's the air with the air coming out that makes the little puck float. That's exactly what our onion storages are like on an industrial scale. So we pile those onions up, and the air comes up through that air hockey floor and passes through the onions. And I talked earlier about storing onions at your house, about how important airflow is. Well, those fans will run 24/7 for the entire time that those onions are in there. And in some cases, we'll even have that air refrigerated. We try not to use refrigeration too much, but there's times when we have different spikes in temperature or weather that make us turn on the refrigeration. But for the most part, we can just use the cool night air that we have here to cool those onions. So during the night, we pull in all the cold air, and during the day, we shut the doors and just recirculate the air. And at night, we open the doors again and purge all the humidity and the warm air out and start the process all over again.
I still have a house fan, so I can do that here at my house, right? The idea is you open the windows, pull in the cool air, close it down. But I don't think very many of us do those things anymore.
Right. Depends on where you're living. Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the questions I always ask people is your favorite way to eat the crop that you grow. So do you have like any recipes your family makes with onions that you think are things other people ought to do?
I don't know if like a special family recipe. My wife is always yelling at me because I don't have onions in the pantry at the house. And then to insult me, she'll go buy somebody else's onions at the grocery store and make sure that I see the label. That's her way to get even with me, and I deserve it. For me, and this is going to sound really simplistic, my favorite way to have an onion is actually on a hamburger, raw on a hamburger. We do a lot of sauteed onions, certainly, and you can put those in anything. And I always say, when you take that recipe and you see it calls for 1 medium onion or a half a medium, just put the whole onion in there. You're not going to see any difference because an onion's always adding flavor. But as far as like coming up with some specific family super cool recipe, I wish I had one. I don't.
Well, I'm going to let you off the hook. Not everybody has to have one. I do have a friend, I may have to find it, that she does something with like frozen onions and cream cheese and bakes it, and it's really very yummy in the process.
You might have to share it on that blog. So
maybe I have to find the recipe instead of you having homework.
Yep.
That's awesome. You said your wife buys somebody else's onions. So if people listening to the show wanted to buy Shay's onions, how do they find them? Where are you guys?
Our onions are in every state, but retailers are really finicky. And so knowing where you can find me is a little bit hard. We pack under primarily 2 labels. We pack for Wada Farms. So if you see a Wada Farms onion, that's ours. If you see an Owyhee Produce onion, it's obviously ours. In the Northwest, in the Western U.S., we're in Albertsons and Winco, and to some extent Grocery Outlet and Walmart. In the rest of the U.S., because of the way the distribution method works, we supply probably most of Florida, Walmart, that is, all the Walmarts in Florida, with our onions. But if you want to find our stuff in Texas or the Midwest, good luck. We're there, but mostly in the food service side of the business. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can find us in the Northwest, maybe Northern California, and the Southeast, and otherwise you'll have a hard time finding us probably.
But you guys work with a wide range of food service as well, in cafeteria kind of settings and restaurants, or
so you'll find out we do a lot of contracts with different food service companies and providers. So if you go to Chevy's, or if you go to, I'm trying to think of some national chains. I'd have to pull up my list to have that in front of me, but we do some Texas Roadhouse. We'll do a lot of the Golden Corrals, and that's nationwide, Golden Corral. What other ones have I got on the list that people are going to recognize?
Well, there's a Chevy's right like one block from me.
So there's a good chance that we're supplying.
A lot of fajitas in my life or something, right? All right. Thanks so much, Shay. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. Yeah, we'll see you later.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've got a lot of links to go with this story with Shay. There's a great podcast called Market to Market that he was on, as well as another great podcast, The Future of Ag. All of that stuff and more going to be put up on groundedbythefarm.com and in your show notes. So make sure you hit click. You can see the videos and photos and some of those things on Grounded by the Farm that don't always make it through the show notes. Going to finish out 2020 really strong, talking about some of the holiday foods that we love so much. From this point on, we're going to start doing holiday episodes. We have things like pumpkins coming and turkeys and all those things. Thanks so much. We will talk to you soon.